Welcome back to the Wet Dreams podcast, episode 3. Yeah, this is episode 3. Talking about masturbation today. The fun topic of masturbation. We're going to talk about some myths. We're going to talk about just what masturbation is. And then some of the things that we hear from our clients about masturbation, whether that's we'll get into some of the client experiences. And obviously, of course, if you have any questions after the podcast or whatever, feel free to send them our way, and we'll, if we're going to have another masturbation episode, we'll answer your questions in that episode. Cool. So, masturbation. Brad, what is masturbation? What constitutes masturbation? What do you think when you hear that term?
What I think of is self-love, right? So it's a way to express sexual pleasure for yourself. So it's the person, so one person sex. And it takes lots of varieties of forms. You can incorporate fantasy into that. You can incorporate toys into that. And whatever that means for the individual person, and it can be part of self-care, right? So and I think it's important to point out that like people who are in sexual relationships with other people can still masturbate. I think that's a myth that's out there, that people think that if you're in a sexual relationship with someone else, that masturbation now is forbidden or whatever. And that's not necessarily true. And I mean, of course, that's something that you need to talk to and work out with your partner. And I'm certainly not saying that you should masturbate in lieu of being sexual with your partner, but I do think that's one of the myths, is that partnered people can't or shouldn't masturbate. So.
Right. Well, and this idea that like you should get all your sexual pleasure, sexual activity from having sex with your partner, and you shouldn't need to masturbate or shouldn't want to masturbate. There's like that thought of like, it's almost somehow you're bad because you want to masturbate, even though you have a partner there that you should have sex with when you feel sexual. That's like a huge thing, I think, in some couples that we see.
Yeah, and it, like a good way to understand that, I think, would be to say, there's sometimes, so if we talk about this issue but not talk about, anyway, so I think that there's people that like to be with other people, but those people also may want to be alone sometimes, right? So
right, like socially,
you're saying. Right.
Yeah.
So they might not want to be around other people, crowds of people, socially all the time. They might want to spend some time by themselves, and so I think masturbation is the same thing. Like, you want to be sexual with your partner, and take care of your partner's sexual needs as well, but then there might be times where you want to be by yourself. And I think that's perfectly fine. As long as you're not, like I said, not doing it to the detriment of your relationship, and only masturbating and not having any sexual energy to share with your partner, then that can be problematic. But I think that it's also fine for someone to express that alone.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's this, and I think I see it in, we have a fair amount of religious, we have a fair amount of religious clients. And I think masturbation in general is a good tool to figure out what you like sexually and stuff like that. But I think sometimes the message of masturbating being wrong in a lot of Christian circles, then later on the individual doesn't know what they like, or when they get married, or not necessarily just married, but they get with a partner and they're like, what's going on? So then obviously the script turns to porn. I mean, that's a whole nother issue, but they don't know what they like, partially because they haven't had the chance to masturbate or to figure out what they're, what's pleasurable to them.
Yep. And that brings up another concept to me, is mutual masturbation, right? So You can masturbate, but with your partner there, or your partner can masturbate you, right? So, that's a way to help for couples to figure out, or for even individuals to figure out what they like and what they don't like, is certainly through masturbation, but also if you masturbate with your partner, then your partner knows what you like and what you don't like as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So why do you think, why do people masturbate? What are some of the reasons why people masturbate, both generally, and also I think it looks different a little bit with the guys that we see, so I think maybe we can talk about those both in different avenues. But so why do generally people masturbate?
The first thoughts that came to my mind when you asked that is stress relief and to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And so of course that may be more male oriented, although I don't necessarily think so.
Right.
But it could be more, I suppose, prevalent in males. But that's the two reasons that I get when I ask clients that question. Is they use it for stress relief, boredom, to relieve boredom, and to go to sleep. Those are probably the top three probably reasons. I'm trying to figure out how to say, probably ideally they should be using masturbation as part of loving themselves and taking care of their needs, right? Taking care of their sexual needs themselves, which still can be true. So they're doing that and trying to fall asleep and trying to relieve stress and stuff like that. So
Right. And it's a fine line, I think. Usually the guys we see are out of control. It's gotten to a point where, whether it's masturbation or pornography or any other sexual activities, to a point where it's out of control and where they're using it as a coping. So it's just interesting because it's a fine line between not just using it for sexual things, which is fine, but then when does that turn into, okay, now it's detrimental to something, you know what I mean? It's just such a fine line, because it's okay. I think it's okay to use it at times to stress relief or to get your mind off of something. I don't think that's bad necessarily. It's then that turns into something else,
Right.
Yeah.
It's, you said you kind of implied where is that line, right? It's, in my opinion, it's when you can't calm down or your stress can't be relieved without doing masturbation or whatever it is that you're doing to cope with. And our brains adjust. Our brains are lazy.
Yeah.
And they adjust quickly to stuff like that. So if you only go to masturbation to relieve stress, then pretty soon your brain will think that it can't have less stress without masturbation. So now you're becoming dependent on it, right? It's a similar thing to, I'm going to make a whole lot of people angry with this next comment. It's similar to coffee, right? So if you need coffee to wake up in the morning, then pretty soon you feel like you cannot wake up without coffee, right? Like you can't function without a cup of coffee or without 5 cups of coffee or whatever it is. So you just have now simply become dependent on that for that purpose that you were using it for in the first place.
Right.
And so, which is that, I think that's how people cross that line into becoming dependent on it, which is, like you said, what we deal with out of control sexual behavior. The coping mechanism has worked too well, and they became too dependent on it, and didn't have any other options to relieve stress or to help them fall asleep or whatever it is.
Right. And I think that's the way I like to frame it with people. It's like having options. So for example, a thought that came to my mind was someone that tends to masturbate with a stronger grip or something. That's kind of how your body and your brain are going to get used to orgasming. So I had a client that was the case, and it was a bit difficult then when he's having partnered sex, because it wasn't as much of a pressure as he's used to that with his hand, and he kind of I forget. I think he said I death grip it or something like
Yeah.
that. But so the way I framed it is like, okay, that's, obviously there's something. The way I framed it is like having options. You want to be able to both masturbate maybe with a little bit of pressure, but then also be able to finish with your partner in the way that you want to. So I think that's the way I like to frame it. Like if your only option is masturbating when you're stressed, or if your only option is going and hooking up with someone or whatever, then maybe it'd be beneficial to have more options.
Right. Well, and then that makes me think of when we do something repetitively, our brain again is lazy, and so it thinks, oh, okay, well, this works and it's easy, let's do this. So in other words, what I'm leading towards is, I think males can tend to masturbate incorrectly, and that always gets my clients' attentions when I say that. So they're like, "What do you mean?" And so, for example, when we masturbate, we move our hands, men, and when we're having sex, we move our hips. Right? We don't necessarily. You can move your partner, but there's a difference between masturbation and sex. Just even in the position and how we use our bodies. And so, for example, we tend to masturbate in the same position. Like if it's laying down, then we tend to masturbate laying down all the time. Mm-hmm. We don't masturbate on our knees or standing up or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so, but often in sex, you have to change positions because you get tired, right? Or your arms hurt or your legs hurt or whatever. And so you change position, and then sometimes men will lose an erection because they've changed position when they're not changing position when they masturbate. Mm-hmm. And so I'll recommend to people, like, when you masturbate, stop halfway through and change position, right? Or stop halfway through and pause for 30 seconds and then resume, because then you're training your body, oh, I'm not done. So when you change positions or have to put a condom on, then you're not going to lose your erection, right? Because then you're masturbating more similarly to sex.
Right. And it's so interesting how, again, like you said, our brains are lazy. Like, you're used to that A to B kind of thing. Like, you start getting aroused, you start getting an erection, and then you stimulate, and then orgasm comes. Like, that's masturbation. It's just kind of pretty much a straight line, whereas sex is like more of an up and down thing. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, when I explain that to people about they masturbate incorrectly, and then I tell them what I just said, their faces, and sometimes they'll audibly say, "Wait, you can do that? Like that's like you can do whatever you want." But it's because we have clients that they'll, sexual dysfunction is part of what we do, right? And so they're not performing sexually with their partner the way that they would like to perform. And masturbation is always part of that discussion with me, is how are you training your brain during masturbation? And then when sex is different than that, and so your brain is going to be like, that's not how we're supposed to do that. There's no death grip during sex, right? Like that's not the way that's supposed to work, right? Our brain is like, it likes consistency. So
well, that's like perfect segue, because that brings up a good thought that I was having about like you talked about the brain being lazy or whatever, but it makes me also think about how often narrow, and I'm going to be stereotypical, I guess, how narrow guys are about masturbation. And like you said, maybe it's laying down, you're stimulating yourself, and then you like the routine, how routine guys are sometimes. But that also makes me think of like the misconceptions, I think, of what's involved in masturbation. So for example, like with toys, with women, generally it's accepted and it's okay. Like, there's going to be toys during masturbation and or sex. But I think there's a different viewpoint of toys with men masturbating, whether that's with a sleeve or like, or pegging or putting something in anal play. You know what I mean? Like, there's this very narrow point of view about masturbation with men. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? But
yeah, I think you're right. There is. I think with a lot of things, men have a more restricted a window of tolerance, let's say, right? Like even with clothing, right? We're more restricted compared to females, right?
right.
We have less. Like our clothes are more boring.
Yeah, like 3 colors.
Yes. And so, I think with masturbation, it's the same thing, right? Like men are more, they feel more restricted. They feel like less is tolerated. When really, especially if you're by yourself while you're masturbating, you can do whatever you want. Within reason, as long as you're not hurting yourself.
Sure.
And so, I think that, again, it kind of goes back to that comment you made earlier about how are they going to know what they like unless they, figure out what they like and what they don't like. And so, that's part of it, like self-exploration and self-expression and allowing themselves room to explore that. And if they explore it and they don't like it, then don't do it anymore, right? But sometimes with clients, I'll hear the comment, well, does that make me gay? Right?
I was just going to ask that. That was going to be my next question.
And nothing makes you gay. Nothing makes anyone gay, right? Wearing a pink shirt doesn't make you gay. Or, if you wear it 7 times or, whatever the magic number is, it's not going to make you anything. And so, this exploring to see what you like and what you don't like, it's not going to make you anything. Except for maybe dependent on doing a routine, right? Because that can make, but sexuality is not, or, sexual preference or identity is not made by experience. Your experience doesn't make your sexuality.
Right.
Your sexuality should be an expression of your identity.
Yeah, I mean, and I've had even couples where, again, especially the like anal play, I think the partner then worries about that. Like, oh, does that mean that you want to have sex with men, or does that mean like that's weird or whatever? You know what I mean? Like, but like you said, like when you're in the privacy of your home, like also you don't get to pick necessarily what feels good to you, at times. Like if it feels good, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Similar to fantasies. I know you had a client or something, you had someone where they were having like rape fantasies and they were like concerned about that, but just because you have that, the fantasy, or just because this thing feels good, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, or it doesn't mean that you want to be raped, or it doesn't mean that you want to have sex with a man and have anal sex with someone. Just means what it means. It's just pleasurable in the moment,
Right. There's, there are lots of straight men who like anal play, and that is simply because the prostate is involved, right? The prostate is an important part of sexual function for men, and so stimulating the prostate when you're being sexual adds to pleasure for men, and so it can be something that you incorporate into that to increase your sexual pleasure. It doesn't mean you're gay. It doesn't mean you want to have sex with a man. Although if you do, that's fine too.
Right, sure.
And so, again, it doesn't make you anything. It just means you are at least subconsciously aware that your prostate can be involved in sexual pleasure. And that's why sometimes when men have prostate surgery, they lose some sexual functioning because your prostate is integrally involved, whether you like it or not, in sexual pleasure. And so, for men who want to stimulate that during sexual pleasure, that's fine, right? Like we just tend to jump to conclusions, right? Like we just tend to, oh, well, this means that. Not if you don't want it to mean that. Like
right. Not if you're saying it doesn't mean that.
Right. You can determine what and explore and find out what you like, but you determine who you are and how you want to express that. And I think we need to, like, I just think humans like to slap labels on people and things, and we just like things to be, in little boxes and, and all neatly put away, but it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Where do you think that, when I was thinking about this, like anal play, but also like nipple stimulation or something, the way I kind of framed it was like, those are not as masculine, whatever that means or whatever, but I thought about like, maybe is that the frame? So anyways, the question is like, where do you think that comes from, that idea that, oh, it's not masculine, so it's weird, or it's not, or you shouldn't be doing it? I don't know, maybe that's not necessarily the frame, but the way I frame it is like the masculinity thing. But what do you think that?
Right, I think, again, there's a very narrow window of tolerance, although I do think in recent decades it's gotten a little wider, but
Right.
There's a very narrow window of tolerance for male sexual expression. Traditionally, men having sex, it has to be with a woman. The man has to be on top, the woman has to be on the bottom, on her back, and nobody moves. Right? And no talking, right? And so, like, I think that's kind of the myth that's been perpetuated through the years of, this is, and if you operate outside of that strict code, then something's wrong, right? You're deviant somehow or perverted. And so, which, it's ridiculous. Sex should be as individually expressive as people are individual, right? Like, as the clothes we wear or whatever else. Like, your sex, either solo sex or sex with a partner, can be creative, and it can vary from person to person. And you mentioned nipple play. That is something that some men are shocked by the concept of having their nipples touched, because, again, I think traditionally breasts are for females, right? And breast stimulation is for females. But men have nipples too, and they're just as sensitive as female nipples, right? And some men don't like their nipples touched, and that's fine, right? But how do you know that unless your nipples are touched, right? And so, and oxytocin is actually released through nipple stimulation. And so oxytocin is a bonding chemical. It is a pleasurable chemical that your brain releases during sexual play and nipple stimulation. Women already release 2 or 3 times the amount of oxytocin that men release naturally. And so stimulating male nipples can help increase oxytocin production. So if you want a man to fall in love with you, touch his nipples with his permission.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's funny. And I think it also comes back to the idea that guys should want sex all the time, or that very masculine idea. So if you're having sex with your partner, then there's no need to masturbate, or there's no need to like explore your nipples or whatever, because you're having sex twice a day or something, whatever. I mean, not saying that's bad, but that's like what a man does, is they have sex with their partner. I think that's part of that concept that's stuck around still, of that masculinity. Like, you should just want to have sex with why do you need to masturbate? Just get your wife and have sex, or get your partner, not just wife. But so I feel like that's has persisted still, that idea of that masculine idea.
Well, and to me, like, that's a very common thought. But to me, I always think of food when we have this discussion, because, like, I might like pizza. I might like pizza a lot, right? And I might want to eat pizza 3 or 4 times a week. But does that mean I don't ever want tacos?
Right.
Right? And so, like, I think that, yes, if you're in a sexual relationship with a partner, you should want to have sex with that person. although there are some sexless couples out there and they're functioning just fine through mutual agreement, but you should want to share pleasure with your partner, and that's fine. But there could be, should be, and are times where you want to be sexual with yourself. And that doesn't mean you don't love your partner. It doesn't mean you don't want to pleasure them. It doesn't mean that you don't want a sexual relationship with them. Like we do these like all or nothing things, and that doesn't make sense, right? Like if you take that, like I just took those words and applied it to food, and it doesn't make sense. Then why do we think it makes sense with sex, right? And so I think wanting to feel pleasure is as much an individual thing as it is a partnered thing, right? Just like when I said earlier about there's times where I want to be alone and there's times where I want to be with groups of people. And I think that's normal.
Yeah. So what are some myths that you've heard? One of the biggest ones I saw was like if you masturbate too much, you'll go blind. That's like a huge one. Are there other myths that come to mind when you think about some of the crazy things that people think sometimes?
I heard one a long time ago that like masturbation will make you grow hair on the palms of your hands. And I'm like, what?
We'd have a lot of hair.
Right. There'd be a lot of men with a lot of hairy palms. And I've not really seen anybody with hair on their palms. Yeah, the blind one is one. And so I'm trying to think of others. I'm sure there's lots of them out there.
Causing acne, that was one that I've heard, like that you'll get a bunch of acne. And I remember when I was in high school, I was had a fair amount of acne, but I did also masturbate a lot. So I was like, damn it, maybe I should stop masturbating, which didn't happen.
Right. But I think acne is like they're putting two things that are coincidentally happening at the same time, right?
Right.
Because teenage boys and teenage girls get acne, right? And whether they're masturbating or not. And so I think, somebody put these two things that are coincidentally happening at the same time. They're saying they're attributing cause there, right? Correlation does not mean causation. And so just because teenagers masturbate and teenagers have acne doesn't mean those two things are related. They also get hungry.
Right.
Teenagers are hungry all the time. So.
Right. It's because they have acne. I think that's the reason.
Yes. So I think that there's just a lot of lack of knowledge out there, and then that perpetuates the myths, right? It allows the myths to take hold and to grow. And there's a whole religious connotation to that about masturbation. And in my opinion, I am not a theologian, I'm not a pastor, but in my opinion, in biblical times, right, in the religious context, procreation was important to fill the planet, right? Now our planet is overflowing. But, in biblical times, be fruitful and multiply was a thing. And so there had to be a reduction of masturbation, right? Spilling your seed on the ground, the Bible talks about. And so that the command was more prevalent then because they wanted reproduction. But now our planet is overflowing. And actually, like less than 0.5% of the sex that you have is for procreation. Among heterosexual married couples who do want to have children, still less than 0.5% of the sex that people have is for procreation. And that is less than 0.5% is probably too high. Because that was based on, I think the math I did was based on people having 3 children and having sex an average of once a week. And many couples have sex more often than that. And many couples have less than 3 children. So that would mean that it's even less than 0.5%
Right.
of the sex that you have is for procreation. And so, and to me, masturbation is the same as having sex when you're not procreating, right? It's the same. You're wasting your seed.
Right, right. Yeah.
And the planet can't withstand everybody to have a child every time they have sex. So
right. Definitely not. Yeah, for sure. What about the one of the can I break my penis? One of the thoughts that floats around there, like from masturbating too much, which is, I mean, there is a risk with certain activities to like do damage to your penis. But anyways, that's again where they mix the like two concepts.
Myth and reality. Yeah, that's funny because when you first said that, I was like, well, yes, it is possible, but it's not probable. And so that is something that we need to talk about. Like, so yes, it is possible to break your penis. So now everybody's horrified. But it's very rare that it happens. There are no bones in your penis.
Right.
And if there are, you should probably get that checked, because there's not supposed to be. Your penis has caverns in it, tubes. It's made of muscular tissue and vascular tissue. Vascular meaning blood, right? Blood tissue that holds blood. Anyway, so there's 3 sheaths in your penis that look kind of like this. There's 2 on the top and 1 on the bottom. And those sheaths fill with blood. And then that's how you get an erection, because there's something similar to a rubber band, whatever that tissue is called, that can constrict, that closes at the base of your penis, and it traps the blood basically in your penis, and that's how you get an erection. So if trauma occurs to your penis, then those sheaths, 1 or more of those sheaths, can rupture, and then that's what we call breaking your penis. The reason I did, like,
right,
because there's no bone, so it's not broken, it just ruptured, right? But rupturing your penis probably sounds even more traumatic than breaking your penis. And so usually the most common occurrence of breaking penises comes from partnered sex, where the partner is on the top and they're doing this motion on the penis, and then the penis slips out, and when the person comes down with force, it causes the penis to bend while erect, and then it puts even more pressure. Think water balloon. Like if you take one of those long balloons and fill it with water and you bend it, it could certainly pop, right? Like bend it aggressively and traumatically. And so penis ruptures are rare. But usually it comes from partnered sex, because it takes a tremendous amount of pressure to rupture that, because that sheath is very strong and very resilient. But it has happened and can happen. And so you would need an awful lot of force with solo masturbation to break your penis. But I'm not saying it's impossible to happen.
Sure.
But
definitely.
Yeah.
Cool. Let me see some other myths. What about one thing? One I wrote down is masturbating is cheating. That's kind of like an interesting one. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, because again, like what made me think about it was that situation where it was atypical, quote unquote, different type of masturbating, that the partner didn't like that person masturbating in that way, or like anal play or whatever. That does that mean you're gay or whatever? So it's that concept of maybe one partner's doing something that the other partner doesn't agree with when they're masturbating. That's kind of a complex thing, I think.
Yes, you brought up several points there.
Yeah.
It is my wish that couples talk more about sex. Well, the couples should talk more about everything. But certainly they should talk more about sex, what they like, what they don't like, what is permissible, what is not permissible. You know, a lot of that is unwritten rules. And when we don't talk about something, but we just expect adherence to a certain behavior, then that's where we get into this gray area. And somebody's going to be mad. Somebody's going to be upset. Somebody's going to be hurt because we haven't talked about it, but yet there's these expectations after the fact, right? And so I think couples should sit down with each other and have discussions about, do you think it's okay if I masturbate once a month? Or once a week? Or once a day? Like, do you think it's, like, is that okay with you? Right? If not, 100% of my sexual energy goes towards you. And they can certainly put a caveat in there, like, no, I'm not having sex with other people, but is it okay if I masturbate once in a while? And, you know, because certainly most women are, you know, have a period once a month. And so for most people, not all, but for most women who are on their periods, penetrative penile sex could be off the table during their period. Again, not every, some people do have sex while they're on their period, and that's fine. But certainly, could that be a time when it's okay for your male partner to masturbate? But have that discussion. That's what I'm saying, is we need to sit down with our partners and discuss these things, right? Discuss how many children you want to have, if you want to have children at all. You know, discuss how often would you like to have sex and how often would I like to have sex. Nobody talks about that, right? But it's assumed we should just understand what the answer is. And so I think couples need to talk about stuff more often. And how do you feel about toys? And, you know, how do you feel about nipple stimulation? I think there'd be a lot less misunderstandings and a lot less hurt feelings if we would talk about stuff like that and negotiate, right? So if somebody's like, no, I don't want you to ever masturbate. Well, how about when you're on your period? Would that be okay? And then they're like, yeah, because you're not doing anything with me anyway, so you might as well. Right?
Yeah.
I had one woman say, as long as you clean up after yourself, that's fine. You know, because he would masturbate and throw the Kleenex on the floor or whatever, and then she'd have to pick it up. And she's like, I don't want to clean up your mess. So
that's reasonable. Yeah, it's fascinating how often that happens, where it's like it's not talked about, but then you get into a situation later on where you didn't even know, I guess, what was happening when they masturbated or whatever, and then later on it's not okay, you know, and then you get into the situation where you're like policing someone's masturbation habits, which I don't think is cool for anyone, for either party. Like you telling someone like, no, you shouldn't masturbate that way, you know, without talking about it before. Now all of a sudden it's like an issue. It's just fascinating how long that goes sometimes before couples like realize, like, oh crap, you've been doing this while you masturbate. I don't like that. Yeah. You know, or whatever, just any type of sexual thing, but that one for sure.
And I think it would be healthier for relationships if instead of people saying, oh, you do that, I don't like that, you know, with the face, ask them, what does that mean? Right? Yes. Like, oh, you like to do this when you masturbate? What does that mean? Right? In other words, instead of accusing them of being gay because they like that or whatever it is, ask
or being
them,
a sex addict or something. That's like another one.
Like, what does that mean that you like to do this? And can I be a part of that? Right? I think that's another question. You know, because, I mean, when it comes down to it, we know what we like, right? So masturbation can be even more pleasurable sometimes than sex, right? Because we know what we want. And if we're not communicating about it, if we're not communicating to our partner, this is what I like, then it becomes easier for self-sex, right? And this might be a good time to throw some stats in there, that, you know, 18 to 29-year-olds are having less sex now than they were at any time in the history since we've been keeping track of these stats. And so they're having more masturbatory sex than they are partnered sex for the first time, like I said, since the history of us keeping tabs on that. Because it's easier. Like, we don't, you know, if if we want to masturbate, then our partner doesn't have a headache or isn't on their period or whatever, right? Like we can take care of ourselves because we know what we like, and our partner doesn't because we didn't have this discussion. And so there's less communication. I don't have to take my partner to the movies.
Right. What's the state of the relationship that day when I'm horny? You know, maybe we were been fighting or
I didn't
something
take out the garbage, so no sex.
Right? True.
And so I think that, I think communication can solve a lot of problems in relationships.
Definitely. Why do you think, now kind of pulling back the bigger thing, why do you think masturbation is such a hot topic or like a hot button issue, both, again, overall, but also, you know, I think about often the Christian people we see or whatever. So like, why do you think it's such a debated thing? Masturbation is such a big thing.
Honestly, I think it's because it's done in private, right? Alone. Anything that people don't understand, they tend to label it as wrong, right? Because there's, just in the normal course of life, like I feel that whatever I do is right, because I'm a good person, right? So I'm going through life thinking, oh, wearing a blue shirt is right. You don't have a blue shirt on, so you must be wrong, right? And so, like, but we do that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We impose our beliefs onto others or whatever,
right?
That it should be that way.
Yeah, and it's almost subconscious sometimes, but you know, we go through life saying, these are the choices I'm making, these choices are right, if you make different choices you must be wrong. And I think that's baloney. Right. Like, I don't think life works that way,
and it happens so often. Sorry to interrupt, but so often I hear the thought, like, or the phrase, like, but I don't do it that way, or like, it's insane how often I hear that phrase, like, you know, I can't even think of an example, but I'd be talking about driving to getting angry when we drive, you know, but I don't get angry when I drive.
Right.
You're a totally different person. Like, of course you don't. Like, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, and then the next step to that, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And then the next step to that is, I think our brains automatically go to what would it take for me to get angry when I drive? Oh, I would have to, like, hate the person that I'm with or something. And so now that means you hate me because you got angry when you drove. Right? So then we make these implications.
It's so severe. Like the all or nothing thing you're talking about. You go to the millionth level of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's what it would take for me to act like that. Right. Instead of just asking the person, what does that mean? Right? Does it mean that you hate the person you're with, or does it mean that you want to kill these people? No, it just means that I don't like people pulling out in front of me, right?
Yeah.
Like, so ask the person, what does that mean? You know, when you do this, and I tell my clients, you have to ask it in a non-confrontational way. So, like, what does that mean? Is different than, I'm curious, what does that mean? I don't understand this, right? Like, those are. So you have to do it in a non-confrontational, non-emotional way, from a place of curiosity and not condemnation.
Right. So I think then it's people's putting those assumptions on to others, like in the scenario of one partner liking anal play or something, like, for me to enjoy anal play, it must be like, that would be weird. So my partner enjoying it, then it's weird, you know what I mean? Because I would never do that. So that,
Right.
It's the same concept. Yeah. So interesting. Cool. Yeah, I mean, again, if there's any questions, we'd love to answer questions here. I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to add about masturbation. I think we touched on a lot of different scenarios and topics.
Yeah. No, I think we're good.
Awesome. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Here's just a tip. We all know self-pleasure can be a positive tool to figuring out what you like, giving yourself a way to relax, etc. However, there are a few things that we want to watch out for. Here are 4 things to avoid during self-intimacy. Number 1, rubbing too hard. Rubbing your penis too hard or too fast can harm your organ. This may cause a lot of friction, which may lead to swelling, rashes, pain, or potential urinary tract infection. Plus, it may desensitize you to the normal variations in stimulation during partnered sex. Number 2, squeezing too hard. In the heat of pleasure, we may often get caught up in the moment, but it is important not to rub too hard because this may leave you susceptible to fracture or unwanted pain. Number 3, doing it behind the wheel. I know the mood can strike anytime or anywhere. However, when you're driving may not be the best time to relieve yourself. It can be super dangerous. Drive safe. Number 4, inserting foreign objects on or in. Some men may enjoy using objects that have holes in them, for example, water bottles, or putting things in their penis holes, for example, pencils. But it is important to use the correct tool for the job. Masturbation toys or sterilized equipment will prevent infections down there. Liking what you're hearing so far? Feel free to give us a follow at our socials down below and get some more info on sex therapy related topics.